Hi, welcome to Morning Talk Show. Today, a conversation about furries. I got in touch with Kathleen Gerbasi, who studies furries from an academic perspective. If you're not familiar with furries, it's basically a subculture of people who are united by making, wearing, and interacting in full coverage anthropomorphic animal costumes. There's been a lot of misinformation about furries. They are very visible whenever they're around. People notice them for sure. And there's been a couple of misleading kind of portrayals of them in media. So I wanted to check into that, see what it was all about. Kathleen was great to talk to, lots of great information on that. So we did have an issue with the video in this particular interview. So the video didn't work out this time. I'm still working on the best way to record these conversations, but the audio is there, and my interest was piqued in some other sort of subcultures and things I'd like to look into. So like and subscribe if you want to hear more of this kind of content, and here's my Kathleen Gerbasi conversation. Thank you. Welcome, Kathy Gerbasi, to Morning Talk.
Thank you.
First of all, am I saying your last name correctly?
It's Gerbasi.
Gerbasi, okay.
Mm-hmm.
My interest, the reason I reached out to you, obviously, is that you are involved in Furry Fandom, and while that's something that I've heard kind of maybe laughed at or discussed as a marginal thing, my interest is always in kind of actually trying to understand and realizing that people that do things in any numbers are responding to a real felt need and something going on in their in their lives, and it does something for them. So I wanted to understand it I wanted to make sure I could speak to someone who could talk about it on more than just a superficial level, and I did some Googling and I found. So can you describe furry culture, what your elevator pitch would be to someone who hasn't heard of it?
Okay. The Furry Fandom is basically a group of people who are really interested in anthropomorphic characters. They often create their own identity. Sometimes they may have a fursuit, although that's not the majority of furries. It's basically people joining together to share a common interest and having fun.
Awesome. Am I right in thinking that Furry Fandom isn't associated with one particular source, one particular cartoon, or one particular movie or author?
Yeah. Okay, so unlike anime, where people try to imitate existing characters, in the Furry Fandom, people create their own unique identity. There's a lot of artistry and creativity that's involved in it. It's very rare to see a furry who's trying to be a character that already exists.
Okay, and that's called a Fursona, if I'm...
Yeah, that identity is called a Fursona, that's correct. And they may or may not have a fursuit.
Right. So the Fursona is deeper than just putting on a costume. It usually involves a change in, or sometimes involves a change in demeanor, a change in personality.
It very likely would involve a change in demeanor. For a lot of furries, it seems like that Fursona is kind of an idealized version of themselves. Maybe I would like to be more extroverted or more social or something like that. And when I'm in that Fursona, I feel comfortable trying out those behaviors that when I'm in my, mundane identity, I'm not so comfortable with. And sometimes allows people to become closer to who they really would like to be by having the opportunity and in a kind of a safe environment to try out those roles or behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Right. with kind of a little bit of anonymity, so that they feel a little more comfortable.
Well, yeah, I mean, so there are a couple of things going on there. One is that the cultural norm for the fandom is to be open and accepting. So people would have the expectation that others aren't going to be judgmental of you. That's one. If you are wearing a fursuit, which is probably only 15 to 20% of the furries, but wearing a fursuit, you are pretty much anonymous. And in that anonymous state, you might feel more comfortable doing things that in your, street attire, you wouldn't want to do. For example, several years ago, I do have a fursuit. It's a really bargain basement fursuit, but I was in the fursuit parade because I really just wanted to see what it felt like. And when I watched the parade, I saw that I was dancing. And dancing is not a behavior that I would do. I mean, even if I go to a wedding, I don't usually want to dance. So
right.
In the suit, I was pretty much comfortable and having fun.
And that was something that you didn't actually even notice you were doing.
I kind of did, but when I saw it, I was surprised. When I saw the video, I was surprised.
I'm reminded of a time in my life when I was new to a high school. I moved to a high school that I didn't know anybody. And at Halloween, I made a costume that was an outhouse. It went around my body, and it had a door, and I had a magazine that I read, and people loved it all day. And I even went in a costume contest, and I almost won. I got to walk a big catwalk. Everyone was cheering and talking about my costume. And then actually it was like, it was kind of unfortunate because I thought, well, I've got it made now. I'm going to be popular in this school. But then I realized no one had seen my face. So the next day, I kind of had to tell people I was the outhouse guy. And then But so anyway, what I'm saying is I guess I can relate because there's no way I would have done that dancing and strutting and so it really it helped me experience something a little different.
Right. And then sometimes people will say after they've, done that kind of more socially outgoing thing in the fursuit, they feel more comfortable trying that just without the fursuit. Maybe it's not that scary after all. So it can help them kind of grow and be more comfortable.
Yeah. It's very interesting how much it can help you to understand others when you actually adopt a persona. Like even actors, on stage actors will learn more about other people and have more empathy for other people based on taking on another persona. So I mean the furry thing kind of makes sense in a lot of ways, to me anyway. So I was wondering if, not to get all psychoanalytical, but when I was looking into furry fandom, it struck me that that it was almost the opposite of the Jungian shadow self. Do you know that idea of the shadow? Carl Jung.
I know who Carl Jung is. I'm not a psychoanalytic person.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, no. I mean, if you take it from more of a perspective of identity theory, we all have a variety of different selves that we portray to the world. And we usually have certain situations where, we're going to behave a certain way when you go to work, and you're going to behave a different way when you're out with your friends or at a party or at home, that kind of thing. So, I think about it more that way. And then on top of it is, for some folks, it's kind of a process of, gee, you know, what would I like to be like? What animal do I feel like, you know, might characterize me? That kind of thing. It's mostly, you know, superficially, it's for fun.
Yeah.
It's a hobby.
Yeah, and that really comes through in all of the research that I did, which admittedly wasn't, you know, hours and hours and hours of research, but I've definitely looked at a bunch of sites and videos and that kind of thing to try and understand. And that's one of the things that comes across is it really seems like you have to leave your bad vibes at the door, and it seems like it's a combination of fun and then therapeutic for people.
In some ways it is. I mean, we have known from our research, and we're kind of working on trying to figure this out, that the percentage of folks in the furry fandom who self-identify as being on the autism spectrum is considerably higher than in the general population.
Oh.
And we've been asking them, we've been conducting focus groups and asking them, you know, why? You know, what is it that's appealing, that kind of thing. So turns out it's what they tell us, and none of this is published yet, but what they tell us is that it makes sense that if they're very sensitive to a lot of stimulation, if they happen to be wearing a fursuit, a lot of that stimulation is reduced.
I see.
And then on the other hand, something that people on the autism spectrum struggle with is often communication, nonverbal communication, understanding more than just the words that someone's saying, that kind of thing. And if you've ever watched people fursuiting, their emotions and their actions are portrayed in a very large and kind of dramatic and pretty unambiguous way. So they feel like
almost simplified.
Yeah, it's easier to communicate and understand what's being communicated. So there's that kind of appeal for some people anyway.
Right, that makes sense. And definitely. And I mean, we all know that it seems to be fairly common knowledge that the autism spectrum, you know, is truly a spectrum in which a lot of people aren't even, you know, haven't been diagnosed or anything like that, but have some of that tendency.
True. Yeah, we have asked.
One thing.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, we've asked, our numbers are sort of like somewhere between maybe 5 and 15%, depending on, you know, they're self-diagnosed, they've been officially diagnosed, you know, it kind of depends on how you ask the question, but it's a considerable number. And
yeah, that's
they're comfortable there, you know, so they kind of seek out that place because they find they're comfortable, which makes sense.
Absolutely. I wonder what one of the things that crossed my mind was, have you done any research about people's kind of religious and mystical beliefs who are involved? Like, is it all over the spectrum?
So if we talk about the religion and the mythical thing, we're probably leaving the furry fandom and crossing over into more of the therianthropy and the other kin realm.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm not.
Okay, so I'll try and explain. So if you go to a furry convention, the vast majority of people that will be there are furries. Most of them will be guys because the fandom is way more populated by male people than female people. But then you also will probably encounter some folks who may or may not be furry, but identify as what's called therian. So these are people who really and truly believe that they know they're in a human body, but they believe that they weren't meant to be in a human body.
Okay.
So we say I'm sure overly simplistic way to present it is to say, so a furry identifies with some species of animals, one or more, identifies with, but a Therian identifies as. They really feel deep down inside that they were born into the wrong body, and the right body should have, had wings or a tail or, whatever the creature is. And for some of them, but not all of them, there is kind of a mystical or kind of a new agey religion kind of element to it, maybe reincarnation, but that is not the case for all of those folks. So that is really kind of, there have only been a couple studies published. We've done several focus groups and some quantitative work, and my colleague, Dr. Fine, has done many one-on-one interviews. So we haven't had a chance to assemble all that yet to really publish it. So when we ask people in the fandom to define what's it mean to be furry, what's it mean to be a Therian, so when you talk about what it means to be a furry, you talk about having fun and community and, hanging out in the fandom, good time, that sort of thing. When you talk about what it means to be a Therian, you talk about, that's really like the essence of your being.
Okay. So furry fandom is almost more like an escape from the seriousness of the world, or, I mean, maybe even an escape from, if it's such a largely male demographic, and maybe there's even an escape from traditional masculinity that can be seen as kind of emotionally reserved or standoffish and
yeah, I mean, that's possible. If you look at the sexual orientation of particularly guys in the fandom, the norm is not to be heterosexual. I mean, my first study was about a third of the people were, kind of heterosexual, a third maybe bisexual, and a third maybe homosexual. That's for the guys. So again, it's an openly accepting culture. It's okay to be gay if you're in the furry fandom.
Right. So the percentage of being gay is probably higher, and it seems like it's almost like a little micro utopia in that way of.
Yeah, I mean, people aren't going to judge you because you're gay. I actually had one participant ages ago who said that it was a guy, and he said, "I'm straight, but I wouldn't tell anybody here that." It was almost like he thought being straight was just too weird for that group.
Right. It's like a through the looking glass from maybe walking down the street. Interesting. Well, I mean, that I'd be maybe offline. I can find out from you who I could talk to about the Therians, because that sounds really fascinating to me as well. I have a kind of I guess I'm just a naturally kind of mystically oriented person, and I feel like there's a lot of I feel like there's a disconnection from that side of ourselves that
yeah, I mean, I know a fair amount about it. I was kind of the first one here that really started looking at it, and the data we've collected so far parallels pretty closely the two studies that I know of that have been published. So people kind of go on a quest. They go on a journey to kind of figure out who they are. They often have a long history of, from a very young age, not feeling like everybody else, feeling like they're different from other people. They will often go through a period of saying, well, maybe I must be a cat or a wolf or a dragon or whatever. And these folks are not, what we might call colloquially say, they're not crazy, right? They know they're
Right.
people, yeah. So they would typically probably reject that idea. No, I really can't be a cat, or I can't be a dog or a wolf. But they continue searching. They continue trying to find an explanation for this. And they, the ones we talk to, obviously come back to the idea that, you know, deep down inside, they were really meant to be some other creature than a human being.
Right.
If you're familiar with like gender dysphoria, transgender people, it's really kind of like being trans species. The parallels between the two
Right.
situations are very, very striking. Some folks ultimately are comfortable with this feeling that, you know, they're really meant to be somebody else. Others maybe less so. It's really, I kind of think this word journey has been really overused, but for these folks, I really do think it is a journey for them.
Yeah.
Some of them, so like I said earlier, for some of them it is kind of spiritual. They talk about maybe a reincarnation, that sort of thing. But I don't think that's true for all of them. For example, a fair number of them report having phantom limb experiences. So they might feel like they have wings on their back, or paws instead of hands, or a tail, that kind of thing.
Right.
So I think there's some fundamental physiological or neurological basis for that.
Right.
They might perceive the world differently. Maybe their brains are wired a little bit differently. To me, it's really fascinating.
Yeah. No,
I met many of these folks, you know, and they want someone to figure out why they feel so different from everybody else. So usually there's the ones that are willing to talk to us, I think, have reached a point of kind of acceptance, you know, like, okay, so I really feel like I'm a zebra or whatever. And I'm just going to have to live with that and make the most of it.
Right. Well, I mean, the way that you describe it, it seems very relatable to me. Just the idea. I mean, it's more extreme likely in their situation, but I feel like there's probably a lot of factors at play there, like their natural personality, whether or not they just personally are comfortable being different than the people around them, and also what messaging they received growing up. Because I mean, there's no shortage of people telling you in no uncertain terms what you are.
Absolutely. Right.
Your entire life, you know. And I noticed that, like, I have a son, and he's 6, and I have a daughter as well, but and they both love to pretend to be animals, really do. But for my daughter, she'll be using words to describe, okay, I'm a baby fox, and now you are this. And, you know, she's setting up a story. She's really the animal, but she's also the omniscient storyteller. Whereas my boy will get right into the feelings of the animal, you know, and he'll growl, and often he's quite aggressive in that state, and not verbal. He won't speak, and it's an interesting thing, because I do think we like to empathize and to think from the perspective of an animal, and if at an early age, if that's not allowed, I could see how that also could build up into a feeling of some part of yourself that isn't explored. I'm not psychoanalyzing, or I'm not saying that that's the reason that they end up being a fairy, but I'm just sort of thinking out loud about.
Right. You know, I mean, the weird thing is kind of that in our society and Western Judeo-Christian tradition, it's not appropriate to say you think you're a wolf, you know, or anything else other than human. But if you go to other cultures and other times, you can talk about, shapeshifters and gods that were animals and all kinds of things like that. So in the big picture of human history, this is not weird, but at our particular point in time, it's not, quote, normal. It's not what the cultural norm is. And it's what I see that the difficulty I think that these folks have is that they know that there aren't very many people that they can tell who they really are. And so you're kind of trying to live this false identity. You're going to work and you have to, they talk about it as putting on human. You can't growl at the customers at work because that's just not cool, but you might feel like it, right?
As unjudgmental. Oh, sorry.
It's stressful for them they're kind of role playing their human life.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's. I think it's so. It seems so relatable. It seems just like a more extreme version of what a lot of people go through. And I do wish there was. I do wish that there was a society that allowed people to that could actually contain difference a little bit more than it does. That being said, if I got growled at, I don't know how well adapted I would be personally. I'm just thinking out loud. If this person serving me at Starbucks growled at me, I would. I'm not sure exactly what I would do, but nonetheless.
They probably won't because they know they're not supposed to, but it would make them feel really good if they could. But, that being said, there have been times that I like to growl at some people, but I haven't.
Well, yes. Yeah, no, that's true. No, it's maybe just the manifestation more than the feeling that might cause trouble.
Yeah.
One of the things that I saw online that was interesting is the millifer phenomena. Are you familiar with that?
Military furs.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know a lot about that. I know there are people in the military who belong in the furry fandom. The fandom itself cuts across, age groups and education levels and occupations, and it's very heterogeneous in terms of all of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Kind of a flat
I mean, like anybody can be a furry, and that's one of kind of the shortcomings that we've encountered is we don't have an official definition, and our definition is you're a furry if you say you are.
But I mean, isn't that seems very in keeping with the ethos of it, though? To me, the open-endedness, it almost feels like if dogma crept in. No, I guess that's a pun. Dogma or Catma crept in, then it would almost be just the same as any number of other institutions. Which actually brings me to one of my questions: is there tension or any kind of infighting within the furry world about definitions or about how things should be done or anything like that?
I mean, there probably is, but I would suspect not any more than any other, large group. Like, for example, when the whole brony thing got really going, there was some of the furries welcomed the bronies with open arms, and some of the furries were like, oh, it's the bronies, that kind of thing. Yeah. But I think, fundamentally the group norms are that you're supposed to be nice to everybody.
Right. Yeah, it seems like the hug is a very, very
absolutely.
common thing.
Yeah. absolutely.
Yeah. It's all
I
about
made a lot
okay,
of friends. I mean, I've been going to AnswerCon in Pittsburgh every year since 2007.
And that's the big one.
Yeah, it was the world's largest. It's been recently eclipsed by Midwest Fur Fest, which is near Chicago. But this past year, there were 8,500 or 9,000 people there. That's a lot of people.
Wow. Yeah,
but,
and when do you wear your fursuit when you go?
So I usually don't. I've only worn it a few times in a fursuit parade. A couple of reasons. One, I'm usually working on the research thing, so I usually have lots of things I'm supposed to be doing. Two, they're incredibly hot, and it's July and humid, and I hate being hot. And my fursuit isn't very good. It's not nearly the quality of most of them. So I bought a partial fursuit several years ago at the art show, but it didn't have a body. It just had the head and tail and paws and all that. And so I made the body just sort of baggy pajama kind of zip up the front.
Okay.
So it's not all nice and fun and sculpted like a really good fursuit, but it was way cheaper than a good fursuit.
Right. So how did you get interested and involved in this to begin with?
So I'm a social psychologist. So social psychologists are interested in how people interact, influence each other, think about things, themselves and others. And then I also became an anthrozoologist. So anthrozoologists are interested in how humans and non-human animals interact with each other. And I had a very tiny part-time job moderating an academic chat group in the early 2000s, and someone posted a question one day, does anybody know anything about furries? And so I waited for someone to answer the question, and nobody did because nobody knew anything about furries. And so I thought, okay, I'll figure this out. And then I went to PsycInfo, which is where psychologists probably first go to look for peer-reviewed stuff, and there was nothing. And then I found this terrible article in Vanity Fair called Pleasures of the Fur by a guy named George Gurley. And he had gone to Midwest Fur Fest and interviewed 8 people and made all these outrageous claims about what furries were. And so for me, it was kind of a really interesting opportunity because I was teaching at a community college, so nobody expects you to do research. I didn't need a lot of money to go find some furries and ask them some questions. And and I was kind of appalled by the fact that the kind of statements that this guy was making without really any good evidence. And I thought, well, if what he's saying is true, somebody should be studying this. And if what he's saying isn't true, somebody should be studying this and saying, look, that's not true. You know what you're talking about.
Right.
So that's how I kind of got interested in it.
It's fortunate that, someone's at my door. I don't know what to do. Just one moment. I'll be right back. Oh, never mind. I'm going to ignore it. It's just a canvasser. It's kind of unfortunate that the kind of thing that you're going about this is a path of empathy and understanding, which will certainly get fewer clicks on the internet than saying it as sex crazed. I'm assuming that's kind of, based on the name of the article, I'm assuming that's kind of the direction that it was
terrible. Going. You can look it up. It's online. You can find it online.
I will.
Yeah, it's really terrible. It's so horrible. I'll tell you this. My husband is a pediatrician. He just retired a year ago, and he was at the hospital one day, and he said, "Oh, I'll just look up this furry article." and the internet shut down because they thought it was X-rated. It's a really bad article. Yeah. So,
like
I mean, I know from things that furries have told us, they were skeptical at first of, why do you want to study us? What are you up to? You want to make fun of us just like everybody else, that kind of thing. And certainly couldn't blame them for feeling that way. But I, along with the other members of my research team, one of whom actually is a furry, Dr. Courtney Plant, and then Dr. Stephen Ryson has a long history of studying fandoms, and Dr. Sharon Roberts has studied identity development, and then Dr. Fine is a clinical psychologist. So 3 of us are social psychologists, 1 clinical psychologist, and Dr. Roberts is a sociologist. So we have made it kind of our mission that, we're not here to make fun of you. We just really want to understand, what the fandom is all about. And people have said things to us like, you have improved the quality of my life, because now I can just say, no, it's not like the CSI episode. It's not like the George Gurley article. It's what these people have, scientifically studied, and you can go to their webpage and you can read about it. And I'm not some horrible weirdo or something.
People seem desperate sometimes to use unusual things as a way to further assert how well they do fit into normal society. And it's unfortunate to me, because I do think that there's so much fantasy and play involved in forming our personalities. And so it seems to me like the culture that we have creates these things, or turns these kinds of things into necessarily fringe things that could be a normal part of people's development. Like, it's hard to know how people, I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel like we would have the most, we would have the best versions of whatever categories there are if people did feel that they could explore themselves, in a way that is empathetic with themselves. It very well could be that if there was no stigma whatsoever about, say, being a furry or pretending to be an animal even in public, that it could be that the numbers of actual furries wouldn't skyrocket but that the people who weren't furries, who had a chance to explore that when they were young, or even when they were a little older, would come back to some version of their original identity with more context, or that kind of thing. That's kind of interesting what you're saying, because when we ask people, how did you get into the fandom, there are basically 2 routes, if you will, that I know of. So one is, from the time you were real little, you were just really interested in anthropomorphic animals. And, throughout thousands of years, you can go back to Aesop's fables, and people are just fascinated by animals and imagine them behaving like, people, talking, all that kind of stuff. And then they happened to find that there was actually a group called Furries, and they discovered this online, and, that's kind of how it became a thing. Really, the rise of the internet contributed. But then there's another group of folks who joined the fandom because they had a friend that was a furry who took them to a convention, and they had such a good time there that they said, oh, I want to do this too. So it's different. It seems like, if someone's craving a little bit of fun and stepping outside of regular life. And then also, I mean, these images of these cartoons are cartoon-like creatures are by no means unusual to people. And also, I've heard it pointed out before, like how amazing and strange it is from the earliest ages. Children can look at these animated characters and drawings and caricatures and not question them, and not, they don't seem alien. They see exaggerated features, but something in us is definitely pre-wired to accept that, because kids would be terrified by their first cartoon Disney movie.
Yeah, that's
It almost
interesting.
seems like they should be, and yet they're not.
If you ever have a chance to go to a furry convention or watch a fursuit parade or something, and lots of, in Pittsburgh now at AnswerCon, they have part of the parade route is outside. So the community can come and watch the parade. They don't have to pay to go inside to the convention, that kind of thing. And kids just love this.
Yeah.
They just, oh, wow, it's so much fun. It is fun. Yeah. It's fun for everybody.
Well, things that add sort of a magical element to everyday life, I think, are kind of appealing to people, like that feeling that, just stepping outside of the normal. It's such a relief to do that, I think.
A lot of, I don't know what the percentage is, but I know furries will go in their fursuits and entertain kids in hospitals, and there seems to be a very important element of the fandom that is about doing good. They always have, at AnswerCon, they always have a charity that they designate and raise, I don't know, in a typical year, $30,000-$40,000 over like from a Thursday to a Sunday, that they then turn around and give to the whatever the local charity is that they've selected. Usually it's an animal charity. So there's that kind of element to it as well that a lot of people don't know about. I would say over the last, 10 years, the media portrayal of furries has moved away from the sensationalism. If you saw the Lisa Ling piece, was in the last year, and she followed 3 furries, and I wasn't in love with it because the 3 furries she picked to follow were all people with problems. I'm not opposed to that, but if you didn't know any better, you might reach a conclusion that everybody that was a furry had a problem, kind of thing. But all of these folks said that, having that furry element in their lives made their lives better. And I think that's not an unusual story.
Right. Well, it's a very interesting subculture, and I'm what were they called? Farians?
Farians,
I almost feel like I want to have a whole conversation about Farians and do a little more research, because typically in the conversations, like my kind of 3-pronged interest is philosophy and psychology and spirituality. And while I think there is a spirit to furry culture, it seems kind of refreshingly non-religious in a way. But then the Farian thing kind of takes it in a different dimension that I don't want to necessarily, like, I could probably go all day on that.
I could send you a little chapter that we did. There's a series of books. The 3rd one is about to come out, I guess, called Furries Among Us. And my research team, we have chapters in all of those books, and one of them was specifically kind of comparing and contrasting furries versus Therians. I could send you that if you want to read it.
Sure, that would be great. And maybe I don't want to presume, but I believe I probably will invite you to have a conversation about that with me at some point if you're interested. But there's no pressure.
I could also send you. I just retired in June, but I'm teaching one class, and I had a student tell me at the end of class that he was a Therian. I'm like, okay, and he wanted stuff to read. So we have kind of a Therian advisory group, and they had sent me some suggestions. So I could forward those to you too, so you could look at the kinds of things that they recommend you would look at.
Yeah. Well, that would be very interesting.
Yeah.
This has been very illuminating. I don't want to keep you too long, but is there anything else that you'd like to say you feel like you haven't gotten a chance to say about? I mean, I know that you're studying this, you're researching it, so there's probably hours and hours of things you could say. But anything else?
I'm the kind of like, I'm the grandmother person of this. I'm like the first person that did this furry work. But to be honest with you, my colleagues are more like at this point kind of the driving force of, doing the data analysis and writing up the journal articles and stuff like that. I'm still contributing, but their university jobs are more in that publish or perish mode than mine ever was.
Okay.
So I'm sort of like, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. And I'm going to proofread your paper and make sure there's nothing really weird in there. And I do like background behind the scenes things and that kind of thing. So, I mean, we all contribute. And you could talk to any one of the other ones and, they might focus on different aspects of it. So. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciated your insights and your perspective on this. I do feel like I understand it a little bit better, and so with that, I guess I will thank you very much. And
welcome,
based on the conversation, thank you. Based on the conversation, are you comfortable with this being put on to the podcast?
Yeah, sure, fine.
Okay. Yeah, I always ask people that at the end because I feel it's your right to.
That's very appropriate. Yeah, just send me like a link or something so I can share it with the team because they'll put it up on our they'll tweet it and they'll put it on our website and stuff like that. So you'll get some exposure from it. I can promise you that.
Absolutely. Well, it's fascinating. So I think my interest in the culture is growing. So I hope we can chat again someday, or that I can hear what you're up to. And yeah.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Bye-bye. Bye.